back everyone, and thank you for joining us again. We are now going to be talking upright pianos with Lewis, our upright expert here in our Cambridge showroom.
Cool, lovely. Thank you very much, Sorsha. Yeah, hello to everyone watching online. I hope you're all doing well, especially considering what's going on at the moment. But yeah, we just wanted to bring a bit of a flavour of our showroom to you. So earlier we had digital pianos demonstrated by Ollie, beautifully, I must say. But with acoustic pianos, I think some people might wonder why you'd want to go for a real piano rather than a digital one, because ultimately digital pianos, you get lots of flexibility and lots of conveniences with those instruments. However, acoustics are a piano in the kind of the purest form. So hopefully what this video is going to show you guys is that although these three pianos behind me look very similar, when I play them they're going to sound quite different, and that's purely because of the kind of musical ideals that these different brands go for. So a little bit more about the pianos behind me. We've got the Yamaha B3E, we've got the Kawaii K300, and we've got this with the chrome hardware, which looks pretty nice, if I do say so myself. And then also we've got the Zimmerman S2. So why have I selected these three instruments? Well, the main reason is because these are all about the same height, 120 to 122 centimeters, in that kind of zone. And we often find that teachers recommend to students that may be upgrading from a digital piano not to go for anything shorter than this. And the main reason for that is because on the low end of the piano, the bass strings are long enough that it gives a nice balance to the rest of the instrument. If it's too short, you might have to intentionally play more loudly with your left hand. And then if you move to a piano that's a little bit bigger, it might take a bit of adjustment to kind of get used to it, basically. So that's kind of the main reason. Also, these are all in a similar price point at the moment. So as of right now, you're looking anywhere between 4,500 to 5,000. So it's kind of value for money wise, particularly good, this kind of area. So I think it's enough kind of preamble about the instruments. What I'll do is I'll start with the Yamaha, and then I'll move from right to left. And then what I'll do after that is I'll talk about kind of features that you normally find with upright pianos, basically. So we'll start with the Yamaha B3. Yamaha's known worldwide for making just incredible instruments across the board. Fantastic motorbikes too, so that's kind of interesting. But with the Yamaha B3, it's kind of similar on the inside to something like a Yamaha U1. 121 centimeters tall. The frame design is quite similar as well, and they use the same Japanese hand-wound strings too. And with this, you're going to get a sound that's classically Yamaha. It's very, very defined, very clear, and also the notes speak very straight, so there's not too much kind of the sound doesn't mingle with itself too much. It's particularly good for things like early classical music, for jazz music, for any kind of recording situation, basically. So I'm going to try and play a few things on here just so you get an idea at home. So I'll start with something late classical, basically, here. So I won't go too much into that, but it's a lovely, well-balanced sound. The bass in particular speaks really nice and clearly. A nice, precise top end as well. So you can hear what I mean about the kind of notes speaking very clearly, and that's particularly useful in jazz, where you'll have voicings that are very, very close together. Bit messed up there, but those notes speak very straight, so those voicings, they kind of crunch really nicely, and I think that's why a lot of people really dig the Yamaha sound, basically. So that kind of gives you an idea of the tonal output of the instrument. Normally Yamaha's instruments are quite heavy to the touch as well, and that's again something that teachers are particularly fond of. The reason for that being that you're less likely to move to a piano that's heavier. So say in like an examination or a performance, it's already kind of stressful enough as it is, but if you're moving to a heavier instrument, you've got that element to contend with as well, and it can just be a bit exhausting. So that's why these instruments are kind of tried and tested and well loved across the world. So yeah, we're going to move from this to the Kawaii, and although Yamaha and Kawaii are two of the largest piano builders in the world, they go for a very different sound profile with the upright pianos, basically. So what you'll hopefully notice from the Kawaii is that it's a much mellower impact of sound. Also, you might notice that in terms of the notes speaking clearly, the Kawaii is a bit more kind of, the sound mingles with itself a bit more. And I mean, great things about the Kawaii in particular is their Millennium 3 action is kind of widely praised for its stability and just responsiveness. But basically, there are finer parts of the wooden action where Kawaii use a combination of, I think it's thermoplastic polymers and carbon fiber. So it just means that with temperature and humidity changes, it's incredibly stable. So yeah, these are really, really lovely pianos, and you get things like a duet music rack, soft close full board. There are lots of nice extra things that you get with the Kawaii, but ultimately, that doesn't matter so much if the sound isn't good. Thankfully, it is good. So let's have a quick listen to this. I'll try and play the same excerpt again. It's a much darker sound overall. Very full in the low end as well. Yeah, it's just a little bit more, it's a little bit of a cloudier sound overall, I would say. These Kawaii instruments, they're built quite similarly, I'd say, to the Yamaha in terms of just the kind of what goes into it. You've got things like a tapered soundboard on the Kawaii, and that's supposed to help with a little bit of a wider tonal range in particular. Yeah, they're really, really fabulous instruments. That kind of cloudiness, again, if I just try and play the same thing earlier. It's a little bit, I think it's better suited to kind of later classical music in particular, but it doesn't quite have the same definition as the Kawaii, as the Yamaha. Apologies for that. So yeah, ultimately, a lot of these kind of things are going to be horses for courses, and that's why it's so important to try and come to a store if you can, and you know, right now that's just not possible, so trying to do what we can here, basically. So we're going to move to the Zimmerman, and now I appreciate very few people will have heard of the Zimmerman brand before, so I'll just give a little bit of a preamble about that, basically. The Zimmerman brand, there were pianos that were built in East Germany, but the brand itself was acquired by Bechstein in either 1991 or 1992, I can't remember exactly. But although the factory still operates, it's actually where the current Bechsteins are built. The Zimmerman brand those pianos are built in the Hailun piano factory in Ningbo, China. Now, it's quite a common practice for high-end brands to basically do some of the manufacturing for their kind of more entry-level instruments in places like Indonesia or China. Like, for example, both the Yamaha and the Kawaii here are both Indonesian built, as an example to that. But what you get with the Zimmerman is basically a piano that's built with European kind of tonal preferences in mind. This is going to be particularly noticeable moving from the Kawaii, but hopefully the Zimmerman is going to sound a lot bolder and a lot stronger generally, especially if I kind of really dig into the instrument. So I'll give a quick play on this, and hopefully that kind of bold sound is going to be absolutely obvious. So I'll play the same excerpt of Debussy again. And again, the low end is really well supported. That's the benefit of going for this kind of height of instrument. But it's just got so much more volume that it can kick out, and I think that's one thing that we've been very impressed with these Zimmerman instruments. Also, the instruments that we generally select, Zimmermans can be kind of bought directly from China, but the kind of mid-range factory, the Hoffman factory, you can get Zimmermans that have been through that factory for one extra session of kind of voicing and regulation work, which means that it's just set up even better. And yeah, we've been incredibly delighted with the quality of these instruments that have come in. They've been surprisingly excellent, I have to say. I'm going to try and play something else. What I might do actually is I might go from right to left, playing a more kind of pop music style of thing, just because ultimately I think we all like to try kind of various different things out. And although I'm kind of hashing things a little bit, I do apologise for that. But yeah, hopefully it comes over quite nicely. So we'll see. And then I'll do the same thing with the Kawaii, and hopefully you'll notice that it's just a little bit darker and a little bit more intimate as well. I think the dynamic range tends to be slightly less wide than it would be on an equivalent Zimmerman instrument, but hopefully you'll hear that for yourselves. certainly the bass end of this instrument is a lot thicker as well. One thing I forgot to mention, actually, I was going from right to left, was the touch of the instruments. So whilst we're getting the mic moved over for the B3, I'll just mention that the Zimmerman instrument will be slightly lighter to the touch compared to the Japanese instruments, and that tends to be kind of like a European preference, basically. The Kawaii and the Yamaha are quite similar. I'd say that the Kawaii action is a little bit smoother, and the Yamaha action's got a bit more kind of resistance. So again, it just kind of depends on if you kind of find voicing melody lines particularly difficult. You might want that extra pressure that the Yamaha requires. But if you prefer a piano that's a bit more nimble, you might prefer something like a Kawaii or indeed a Zimmerman. So now I'll move over to the B3, and I'll try and play that little segment one more time. You should hopefully notice that it's a lot brighter and a lot clearer as well. Certainly the top end of the instrument is much better defined on the Yamaha, if that's the kind of sound that you're looking for. So that kind of wraps up the specifics on these different instruments. I will finally talk about kind of different options with these pianos, because ultimately you can find them in different finishes, that kind of thing. Although I will say right now, polished black is pretty much all you're going to find at the moment. Supply is kind of a bit of a strange one right now. But with regards to the instruments themselves, I haven't really delved much into what the pedals do. So if you're kind of curious about that, with most upright pianos, you'll only find that this isn't true on kind of high-end upright pianos. But the left-hand pedal is something called the half-blow pedal, and it moves the hammers slightly closer to the strings. The idea of that is it's much easier to play more quietly, and it's mimicking the una corda pedal on a grand piano. But then also the middle pedal is probably the most important one, because I think a lot of the reason why people won't go for acoustic instruments is because of the noise, like especially if you're in terraced housing and that kind of stuff. It can be, you might be annoying neighbours, and if you're not particularly friendly with them, that could be another stress in your life. We don't really want to encourage that. So what upright pianos do have is something called a practice pedal. So when the middle pedal is down and across, instead of a loud sound like this, the sound becomes more muffled. There we go, that's better. So it's ultimately the sound's way less defined here, but the whole point of that pedal is to make sure that if you want to practice late in the evening, you've got some way of modulating the volume. So really, really useful to have. And that was basically a feature before silent pianos became a thing. And we do have the silent system equipped on the K300 here. I'm not going to delve into the details of what that really gives you, but with a silent instrument, instead of that kind of muffled sound, when the middle pedal is down on the Kawaii, you're not going to hear anything except for the key action. And so basically with this, you plug in some headphones, switch the digital system on, and you just keep practicing. So it's particularly useful for apartment buildings and that kind of thing. So yeah, lots and lots of good options. And this is a tiny selection of what's available, not just from us, but just in the wider world. There are some fantastic pianos to be found. So yeah, I mean, that kind of wraps everything up here. I hope that was helpful, and I hope that you could hear the differences between the three. That was kind of the main thing we were going for. But if you do have any further questions, the best way to get in touch with us right now would be through our social media channels using the hashtag MillersLive, but also we're still responding to phone calls, emails, and also live chat on our website. That's a really great way to get in touch with us. So yeah, I hope that was helpful, and thanks so much for watching. If you're interested in pianos that are a bit more horizontal, you're going to want to come back at 1:30, because my friend Matthew is going to be demonstrating some really lovely grand pianos. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you soon.